It began on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that shouldn't have meant anything. He had gone over to his friend S house to help finish a project, half distracted by deadlines and half by the heat of early summer. The scent of something warm and sweet drifted from the kitchen, soft music humming in the background. Then the moment that would replay in his mind for months happened. She stepped out from around the corner. Her presence didn't announce itself. It settled into the room. There was a quiet confidence about her, the kind that came from someone who didn't chase attention but drew it anyway. Her dark hair was loosely tied, a few strands brushing her cheek. Sunlight caught the faint gold in her eyes when she smiled. "So you're the one he is always talking about," she said, tone half amused, half curious. Something in that voice, calm, low, touched with warmth, made him forget what he was supposed to say. He managed a polite reply, but his mind was busy cataloging details. The curve of her wrist as she poured lemonade, the faint scent of citrus on her skin, the laughter that came easily and ended softly. She carried herself with an ease he'd never seen before, not the carefree kind, but the sort that comes after weathering storms and learning to live gracefully among the pieces. Her eyes held both kindness and distance, like she'd learned to smile through the ache. When she handed him a glass, her fingers brushed his, a brief contact, accidental, but enough to send a pulse through his chest that startled him. He told himself it was nothing, just awareness, just nerves. Still, he couldn't shake the way his heartbeat had reacted. As the afternoon stretched on, she moved around the house, humming under her breath, laughing with her son. Every now and then, her gaze would meet his, not intentionally, not flirtatiously, just unknowingly. And each time, he'd look away first, unsure of why. His stomach twisted in quiet anticipation. At one point, she joined their conversation, sitting casually on the edge of the table, barefoot, sipping from her cup. She listened more than she spoke, but when she did speak, it carried weight, gentle, thoughtful, and touched with something bittersweet. When he finally stood to leave that day, she walked him to the door. "Thanks for helping him out," she said softly. Then, with a teasing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she added, "You're welcome here anytime." The words lingered longer than they should have. He nodded, forcing a grin, pretending it was just politeness. But as he walked home, the memory of her voice followed him, the tone, the pause, the way her smile had faltered just slightly at the end. He didn't know it yet, but something had shifted quietly that afternoon. Not love, not yet, just awareness, a spark waiting patiently for air. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow melody, soft, uncertain, but impossible to ignore. Every time he visited his friend S house, he told himself it was just for the project, just another afternoon of casual company. But deep down, he knew he looked forward to something else, the possibility of catching even a brief glimpse of her. Sometimes she'd appear in the kitchen, wearing a light cardigan, hair loosely tied, a faint trace of perfume floating through the air like memory. Other times, he'd hear her humming in another room, her voice threading through the quiet like a song that didn't need words. Every sound, every glance started to mean more than it should. She had a way of talking that made silence feel safe, not awkward, but gentle. Once, while passing him a tray of cookies, she said with a small smile, "You remind me of someone I used to know," before everything got complicated. He didn't know what she meant, but her voice carried a shadow, not sadness exactly, but something softer, deeper, like nostalgia. From then on, he started to notice her differently. The way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the quiet strength in how she moved, the faint tiredness she hid behind her charm. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and maybe that's why he couldn't look away. One afternoon, while his friend ran to the store, he stayed behind to tidy up the table. She walked in, sleeves rolled up, and said, "You don't have to do that." He smiled. "I don't mind." She paused, studying him for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "You're kind. People don't notice small things anymore." It was such a simple statement, but it felt intimate, like she'd seen through a part of him no one else had bothered to. He didn't know how to answer, so he just smiled. And in that silence, something passed between them, not spoken, but understood. After that, their moments grew less accidental. She'd linger in the living room a little longer when he was around. He'd find small excuses to stay, another question about the project, another glass of water, another chance to hear her voice. And yet, beneath the warmth, there was restraint. A line neither dared to cross, but both had begun to feel. Every word seemed to hover between friendship and something deeper. One evening, as he left, she caught his gaze and said softly, "You've got an old soul. You know that?" He laughed nervously. "Is that good or bad?" She tilted her head, a quiet smile playing on her lips. "It's in rare." He walked home that evening with her voice echoing in his mind. Rare. The word tasted strange, new, heavy, and sweet. He told himself it was nothing, just kindness. But even he didn't believe that anymore. Something unspoken had begun to bloom, small, hidden, but real. It happened one evening when the sky was bruised with the colors of a coming storm. He had come over to drop off something for his friend in notebook. Nothing important, but his friend wasn't home. She answered the door instead, her hair loose, a soft cardigan slipping off one shoulder, eyes lit faintly by the glow of the setting sun. "Oh, it's you," she said with a surprised smile. "P.S. out running errands. You can wait if you'd like. You shouldn't be long." He hesitated, but she'd already turned toward the living room, motioning for him to follow. The house was quieter than usual, no TV noise, no chatter, just the soft tick of the wall clock and the low rumble of thunder in the distance. She poured him tea, the faint clinking of cups filling the silence between them. "It's been ages since I had company at this hour," she said, almost to herself. "Evenings used to be my favorite, and now they just remind me of what's missing." He looked up. Missing? Her eyes drifted toward the rain, starting to blur the windows. Noise. People. Someone to talk to without pretending everything is fine. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened slightly around the cup. He didn't know what to say. She wasn't speaking like an adult humoring a younger man. She was just being honest. Vulnerable, in a way he hadn't seen before. "Do you ever feel like life moved on without asking you first?" She asked quietly. He nodded slowly. "All the time." She smiled, not with amusement, but with recognition. For a while, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence like a lullaby, soft and rhythmic. At some point, she reached for the blanket draped over the couch and tossed one in toward him. "You'll catch a chill sitting by the window like that." When he took it, their fingers brushed not deliberately, but the warmth lingered. He looked at her, and she met his gaze, her eyes soft and searching. "You're good company," she said after a long pause. "You listen without trying to fix everything. Most people forget how to do that." He smiled faintly. "Maybe because I know what it feels like to need that." She looked at him for a long time, then turned away, pretending to adjust the curtain. "You shouldn't be so understanding. It makes people want to tell you things they probably shouldn't." He didn't respond, just watched the faint curve of her shoulders as lightning flashed outside. For a brief second, she seemed both strong and breakable at once. When the thunder faded, she glanced back, voice softer now. "You should go before it gets worse outside." He stood reluctantly. "I'll see you soon." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "You always do." As he stepped into the rain, something inside him shifted again, not loud or sudden, but deep, like roots quietly finding soil. He realized that night wasn't about what was said, but what was understood. Two lonely hearts finding quiet in each other as company. The next time he saw her, it wasn't planned. He'd come by to help his friend move some boxes from the garage, but his friend had stepped out. Again, she was in the garden, kneeling near the roses, her hands gently brushing soil off the stems. The sun was low golden, warm, and soft, turning the edges of her hair into strands of light. She didn't notice him at first, humming quietly to herself, lost in the rhythm of pruning and tending. He stood there for a moment, just watching. There was something mesmerizing about the calm precision in her movements, like she was holding the whole world together through small acts of care. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled. "You always arrive at the quietest moments." He laughed lightly. "Maybe that's when you need company the most." Her gaze lingered on him for a second longer than usual, the kind of look that says more than words can. She set the shears aside and stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. "You really shouldn't say things like that," she said softly, though there was a trace of warmth in her voice. He stepped closer, picking up a fallen rose petal. They just sort of slip out. She shook her head, amused, but her eyes softened again. "You remind me of when I used to believe in things, in simple things. Like someone showing up without needing a reason." "Maybe I did have one," he replied. "And what reason would that be?" He hesitated. The truth hung between them, fragile and unspoken. Instead, he offered a faint smile. "To see if your garden survived the storm." She exhaled through a quiet laugh, one that carried both affection and defense. "It did, barely." They began walking together among the flowers. The air smelled faintly of earth and jasmine. She told him about how she planted the roses after her husband left, not in anger, but as a way to keep something alive. He listened, really listened, and she could feel it. That kind of presence rare, steady made her chest tighten. When a thorn pricked her finger, he instinctively reached out and took her hand, brushing his thumb lightly over the spot. The touch was innocent, yet charged with something that neither of them dared name. "You should be careful," he said quietly. She looked at their joined hands, then at him. "I used to be," she whispered. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was heavy with meaning. The kind that wraps around you, making the smallest movement feel monumental. A soft breeze passed between them, carrying the scent of roses and something unspoken longing, maybe. Finally, she pulled her hand back, almost reluctantly. "You really should go before your friend gets back," she said, her voice steady but her eyes uncertain. He nodded, taking a slow step backward. "You'll be out here again tomorrow?" She smiled faintly, looking down at the roses. "Maybe, if the weather's kind." As he turned to leave, her voice followed, low and warm. "And if it isn't, and I suppose I'll still be here." That single line echoed in his mind long after he walked away, not just as a statement, but as a promise she wasn't supposed to make. The rain came without warning, one of those sudden, heavy downpours that drenched the world in minutes. He had come to return a borrowed book, but by the time he reached her house, his clothes were clinging to him and the streets had turned to rivers. He rang the bell once, half expecting no answer. Then the door opened, and there she was, barefoot, in a soft gray sweater that hung loose on her shoulders, hair slightly messy from the humidity. The warmth from inside contrasted with the cool air outside, and for a moment he simply stood there silent, breathless. "You'll catch a cold," she said, her tone gentle but layered with concern. She stepped aside, letting him in without hesitation. "Come in before you freeze." As he entered, the faint scent of tea and rain filled the air. The house was quiet, no TV, no sound except the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. She handed him a towel, her fingers brushing his when he took it. The touch lingered, accidental yet deliberate, as if neither wanted to pull away first. He dried his hair awkwardly. "I just came to return this," he said, holding up the book. His voice felt too small in the softness of the room. She took it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You could waited till morning, or at least till the sky stopped falling apart." He shrugged, a hint of nervous humor. "Maybe I didn't want to." She tilted her head, studying him. "You're always so honest when you shouldn't be." "I'm just bad at pretending." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was thick with everything they hadn't said. The rain outside softened to a quiet drizzle, as if giving them space. She moved to the kitchen. "There." He nodded, watching her. The way she moved, graceful, measured, unaware of how every small action drew him in. When she handed him the cup, her fingers brushed his again, and this time, neither looked away. He finally said it, voice low, almost trembling. "I think about you more than I should." Her hand froze mid-motion. She looked up, eyes wide, then softened. "You shouldn't say things like that." "I know," he said quietly, "but it's the truth." The weight of his words hung in the air, delicate and dangerous. She sat down across from him, her hands folded around her cup like she needed its warmth to stay steady. "You're young." she said finally. You'll find someone who fits your world better. He met her gaze. What if I already did? Her breath hitched just slightly before she looked away, blinking hard. The rain picked up again, tapping softly on the glass, like a rhythm their hearts had started to follow. She smiled then, faint but sad. You don't know what you're saying. I do, he whispered. I just don't know what you'll say back. Her eyes met his again this time. No deflection, no guard. Just quiet longing and fear intertwined. She stood slowly and placed her hand on his cheek, her touch tender and trembling. Promise me, she murmured, voice barely audible. You one team make this harder than it already is. And just like that, her hand slipped away, leaving behind warmth and silence he couldn't unfeel. The evening air was heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. The world outside had gone quiet, muffled by the soft aftermath of the storm. He stood outside her house again, unable to stay away, drawn not by impulse, but by the ache of something unresolved, something that had begun and refused to end. When she opened the door, surprise flickered across her face, not annoyance, not even confusion, but something softer. Something that said she'd been waiting too, even if she hadn't admitted it to herself. You shouldn't be here, she said finally, her voice low but unsteady. I know, he replied, his tone calm, steady, but you didn't tell me to stay away. That silenced her. She stepped aside, and he entered. The dim light from the lamp painted the room in gold and shadow. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the sound of her breathing steady but tense. She poured them tea again, as if pretending everything was normal would make it so. But this time, her hands trembled slightly. You can't keep coming here like this, she said, eyes fixed on her cup. People talk. And she hesitated, then sighed. It's not fair to either of us. Then tell me to stop, he said quietly. And I will. She looked up. His words caught her off guard, simple, honest, with no trace of defiance. Just truth. I can't, she whispered. It was the smallest confession, yet it filled the entire room. The silence after that wasn't uncomfortable, it was raw, fragile, like standing too close to something sacred. He moved closer, slowly, like approaching a line neither wanted to draw anymore. Why does it feel like you're always fighting yourself around me? He asked softly. Because I am, she admitted, voice cracking slightly. You make me remember what it felt like to be and seen. Wanted, but scares me too. I'm not supposed to feel this way. He took a slow breath, searching her face, the vulnerability in her eyes, the quiet conflict she carried like armor. Then don't fight it tonight. Her eyes lingered on him long enough to show hesitation, long enough to show surrender. She reached out, brushing her fingers against his hand. The touch was brief but electric. He turned his palm upward, letting her hand rest there, warm and trembling. Promise me, she said again, the same words that started it all. Only now they felt heavier, deeper. If this ever hurts you, if this ever feels wrong, you'll walk away. I can't promise that, he said, because walking away already hurts. Something in her expression broke then the wall, the restraint, the careful distance she'd held for so long. She took a step closer, close enough for him to feel her warmth, to hear the uneven rhythm of her breath. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The world outside faded, leaving only the pulse of something dangerous and beautiful between them. Her fingers rose, brushing the side of his face, the gesture both tender and terrified. You don't know what you're doing, she whispered. Maybe not, he said, voice quiet but sure, but I know what I feel. And then just before the distance completely vanished, she closed her eyes and stepped back. The space between them filled with everything they couldn't say. Her whisper came barely audible. Go, and before I don't let you. He stood there for a long second, memorizing the way her eyes shimmered in the dim light, half pleading, half longing. Then, slowly, he nodded and turned for the door. Behind him, her voice came again, soft and trembling, the same haunting sentence that would replay in his mind long after he left. Promise me, and this will be our little secret. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, another one quietly began. The days that followed felt heavier than they should have. Each morning began the same, the world outside alive and loud, while his own thoughts stayed muted, caught somewhere between guilt and longing. The night of the storm replayed again and again, not for what had happened, but for everything that almost did. He had gone back, not because he didn't want to, but because she had asked him not to, and he promised in silence to respect that. Still, every place around the neighborhood felt like it carried her echo. The sound of rain against the glass, the faint scent of tea, even the small crack in her laugh that appeared when she tried to sound fine. And then, one afternoon, he saw her again, not by plan, not by accident either. She was outside, tending to her small garden, sleeves rolled up, her hair tied back. The late sunlight fell on her face, and for a moment, everything felt painfully familiar, as if time itself had circled back just to test him. When she noticed him, her expression flickered surprise, then softness, then something unreadable. She didn't move away. He walked closer, slowly, as though approaching a fragile memory. "Hi," he said, voice quiet. "Hi," she replied, the corners of her mouth curving just slightly. "It's been a while." "Yeah," he said. "I wasn't sure if I should." "I know," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I didn't make it easy, did I?" There was no bitterness in her tone, only acceptance. The kind that comes after nights of thinking, crying, forgiving. They stood side by side, not saying much at first. The silence wasn't charged this time. It was peaceful. He noticed the faint silver strands in her hair, glinting in the light. She noticed how he stood differently now, taller somehow, calmer. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but certain. What happened that night? And it wasn't a mistake. But it couldn't be more than it was. He nodded slowly, eyes on the ground. "I know. I just didn't want it to end with silence." "It didn't," she said gently. "You gave me something I hadn't felt in years, the reminder that I could still be and seen." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. "That means more than you think." He looked at her then, the same warmth in his chest that had never really left. "You'll always be someone I'll remember that way." She smiled, truly smiled this time, and reached out, touching his arm lightly. The gesture was brief, but full of meaning. "You should live your story now," she said. "Not mine." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of jasmine through the yard. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed, the sound pure and grounding. He turned to leave, but before taking the first step, he looked back one last time. She was standing there, framed by sunlight and memory, not waiting, not longing, but at peace. Her final words reached him just before he walked away, barely louder than the breeze. "Take care, and remember, it's still our little secret." He smiled to himself, a quiet ache settling into something gentler, gratitude, maybe even love. Not the kind that burns forever, but the kind that stays soft, hidden like a bookmark in a chapter that changed everything. And as he walked away, the world felt lighter, not because he let go of her, but because he finally understood some connections aren't meant to be claimed and only cherished.